So I guess these videos are just gonna be me getting some thoughts out of my head and also kind of breaking the barrier of trying something new, trying to resolve some of the fear around making videos that I have. Probably no one will ever see this video, but I guess here goes. So some of the things I've been thinking about is, first of all, I'm on a 52-day meditation streak. So 52 days with at least one session of meditation. Usually that's only like 5 minutes lately. But I think consistency is much more important than duration. And I've certainly, I think, noticed a big difference in my life. One thing that happened yesterday is, I don't know, like often when I say something that I feel like is maybe the wrong thing, there's this immediate like regret, like this like intense like emotion that usually washes over me. And I guess I realize now these days, probably the last like several months, well maybe not that long, but last month or so, there's been this like immediate reaction when I feel those feelings of stepping out of it and watching it, if that makes sense. Like almost on the edge of my seat. Like there's this feeling of the feeling, and then a jumping out of it, and then this like curiosity of, whoa, what's going on here? I'm feeling this really big feeling, like something must be happening. And of course it's very helpful in resolving a lot of that anxiety, or at least like not letting it affect me, which is kind of cool. So the other thing that I've been thinking about is I finally listened to that podcast on death, the Sam Harris podcast, where he had that guy who was a hospice worker. And it got me thinking a lot about like why, well, first of all, that I never think about dying, like ever. I rarely think about like anybody in my life dying, except to just like be really fearful about that, right? And then of course when I feel those feelings of fear, just push it away. And well, this thought was all brought upon because of, in that podcast, the guy mentioned that in our culture we just don't think about or talk about death. And also too, like, and so I guess first of all, it got me wondering is if all cultures are like that. I think there are cultures, I've heard of cultures, I'm gonna do some research on this. I've heard of cultures that have a culture of embracing the idea of death, right? And I'm really interested in how that might affect someone's day-to-day life if, for example, every day they contemplated their own mortality and death, right? And so I think I'm gonna start for the next week or so, maybe even longer, we'll see. I'm going to, after my normal meditation of at least 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to try 5 minutes of death meditation. And I guess the intention of that is just to contemplate my own mortality, try to feel some of those feelings of loss, but in an embracing way, right? Like, so either like imagine the thought of actually dying, right? And the fear, I think, there is based on a fear of loss, a fear of loss of opportunity, a fear of loss of this life and the things that go along with it. And see if that maybe even affects my perspective, because it's super interesting. Like lots of people who, and the guy that was interviewed in this podcast, who was a hospice worker, he had an experience where he had a heart attack and came very close to death. And it's very common after experiences like that for people to embrace life to a greater degree. And I think probably a lot of that is simply just being confronted with loss helps you appreciate what you have. I wonder if there's an exercisable way to embrace that idea without actually having to go through a horrible near-death experience. So I think I'm gonna try to do that. So another interesting thought that's been on my mind is reading some of the letters of Seneca, the Stoic guy. So one of those letters talks about, and I'll have to reread this passage. It talks about during times of calm and peace to fortify yourself, and the metaphor he gives is is one of an army. When an army is not at war, they are refining their skills. They're practicing building fortifications against invisible foes, right? And the idea is that, and I think this comes back to something that I've thought about a long time, and I think why this stood out to me so much is during my time like with my therapist, often I'd like go to her office, and some weeks I'd be just like, I feel great, like what do I talk about? What can I do? And I was almost disappointed because I wanted to be working on something, and I've felt that before. Like things are just going too good, and when it's going too good, there's less self-development happening. But I think there's two sides to that, and I think rather than being a double-edged sword, I think it's what's the opposite of a double-edged sword? I think it's two good sides, right, of the sword, which is then when I'm in the hard times, I've been able to cultivate this habit of trying to look for the personal growth, right, and trying to and similar to that experience with meditation, to jump out and watch what's going on, and that brings meaning, I think, to the struggle and really helps me, feel much better about it, but also just embrace the fact that life is just a series of ebbs and flows, right? And, but all that said, during the peaks, right? During the peaks, I'm interested in this idea that Stoicism has of trying to fortify oneself for the later struggle, right? And I guess a lot of the struggles that I have are around anxiety, right? Like social anxiety, from an early age, my whole life, I've always the most dreadful feeling I think for me ever is the idea that someone else thinks I'm awkward or weird or annoying. Probably annoying is probably the biggest trigger word for me, and I wonder if there's a way that I can try to fortify myself against that. And this ties into this other idea of Stoicism that I've heard from Tim Ferriss, which is and so I think part of this intention of preparing oneself for the struggle is to create situations that embody your greatest fear, the state that you fear most. So Seneca talks about specifically wearing scratchy clothing, eating really bland and cheap and food that people in poverty would eat, and because lots of people fear being in poverty, right? And I'm sure I do, I think, but that's not I don't think that's less of one of my driving fears, I think, but it's definitely something to explore in the future. But so if this idea of feeling fear of being annoying, fear of just social rejection, right, and even just being seen as weird, I wonder if I'm going to be thinking about, I don't know, I have been thinking about this for a while, but I'm thinking about ways to try to embody that. So Seneca, so they'd wear these scratchy clothing, and then all the while you're wearing the scratchy clothing, you're eating bland food, you're growing your beard, you're acting like you're in poverty, you do that for a few days, and you do that regularly, and all the time ask yourself, is this the state that I most feared? And that means that can strip away the fear of that state. So when you're in that struggle, right, then you fear that state less because you know it's not that bad. And I think Stoicism, I mean, granted, I'm not the biggest expert on Stoicism, but I think one of the biggest intentions of Stoicism is to free yourself from reactivity, right? And to free yourself from like any emotions that would cloud your judgment, right? And fear of failure, like just fear in general, is a big emotion. And the interesting thing about fear is, and personally, I've never experienced something that I really feared that actually came to pass that was even close to how bad I thought it would be. So, like, at the root of the fearful emotion is usually a lie, right? And so when we make decisions based on fear, we're deciding based on a false assumption, right, of how bad it can be. So, but those are some ideas that I'm going to think about. Peace.